Hello and welcome to DaleSchaferLaw Chats, a candid conversation with industry professionals on complex legal and business issues in the cannabis industry. I am Heather Schaefer, legal assistant with the law offices of Dale Schafer and CEO of Agorasi Business Services. And you all know attorney Dale Schaefer, two-decade California cannabis attorney with a current focus on cannabis business law. Today, we are chatting with JJ Loder, who's an expert in building and development. So, JJ, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Okay, about me. So we really jumped into, let me rewind. This story goes beyond me. Our construction company was founded by my father and grandfather. Basically, they were building large-scale malls up and down the state of California in the late 80s, early 90s. And that company had basically saturated the market with commercial malls and located out of the state. I think they went to Utah. And my grandfather retired, and my father said, well, I'm not moving to Utah because I've got 3 sons. So we started up our construction company, and we went back through and started working on the tenant improvements for within the malls. And from there, we started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, having this large scale building background. And, when cannabis became legal in the state of California, we weren't against it. I mean, we just kind of like put some feelers out there. It was like, if it comes running, if they come knocking, we'll answer. We didn't know much about it. And they did come knocking. And at the time, we were doing a section of business in light industrial, large remodels of large tenant improvements. And one of them was a indoor swimming pool, which at the time, looking back, it was a complex project. There's a lot going on, a lot of HVAC, electrical power upgrades, pumps, water. And we started looking at it, and lo and behold, one of the first projects that came rolling our way was a cultivation project. And we got the specifications for the HVAC and fertigation system, and it matched surprisingly similar to the indoor swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of scratched our head and went, they are very, very similar, to the point where the equipment was almost identical. And then at that point, the light bulb went off, I wonder how many other California builders know this. And it turns out there wasn't very many that had done this type of work. So lo and behold, we found ourselves having an extreme edge in a newly developing market, and we just ran with it because we had unmasked the scary things. We had already gone through the design. We'd done some really, really complex building, indoor environment control, and we just kind of sprang into, well, what's next? When we went in and started looking at extraction, and we actually, a coworker and I, we flew out to Colorado and took a chemistry class, high-level chemistry class, and what the heck is going on with the extraction, and touched the machinery, felt it out, and then realized that it really isn't about the equipment is specialized to whatever you're doing, but we as builders were really focused on the fire code and basic building aspects that we had been doing for since we've been building. So it turned out we didn't think that was very scary either. So then it just kind of revolved into us doing these gigantic facilities, very, very complex, but really working with the engineering and kind of dumbing it down and taking in small sections. In the interim, we were taking facilities that were totally not designed for anything cannabis or anything other than distribution, and turning them into campuses, new infrastructure, big, huge power, big, new solar, new water, new all backup generators, fire sprinklers, put in a 500,000 gallon fire tank for a building that was never designed for it. And it was just heavy duty construction, all within the cannabis industry, and working with some really amazing, intelligent people along the way, and kind of holding hands, because a lot of the cannabis people, they're not builders, or they understand the process of it, but actually doing it in a regulated market in California, many of them had no idea what our codes were and the difficulties of just getting things pushed forward. So Yeah, that's what we've been doing for the past couple of years. Getting through policies and conditional use permits and developer agreements, and picking up and working with very smart people along the way. It's been a blast. So yeah, and
Okay.
so that now we got hooked up with Magic Path, which is really exciting.
Well, that's where you and I came together, and one of the first discussions we had were some of the common problems I've seen in the industry, you've seen in the industry. To back up a bit, my cousin's married to a retired fire battalion chief. Okay, teaches fire sciences, and when my uncle died, I discussed this with him, and he sent me a copy of the state fire codes. I thought, oh, so people have thought about this before, and the business interests that I was running into, they were so screwed up. People had not really thought about, well, what does it mean to set a business up and run them and be compliant? And I know that some of the discussions you and I had were that you signed contracts with people, and when they found out what it really meant to build stuff out, people start getting squirrely, and it was a problem. So what you and I started to do was, let's build from the ground up as much as we can. We got a couple projects like that right now, so that if it's going to be what I call the shit sandwich, it's our fault.
Yeah, we own it.
Because I've gotten a few of those, and it's really difficult to polish that thing up and make it tasty when it gets started on such a bad foot. So what I want to start discussing with you, same thing we discussed when we talk to clients and you and I chat, is that let's assume that we're going to go into a fresh piece of property. We just had a recent discussion about this. Can you discuss with me and the people that are watching this what you do to take a look at a piece of property and how it might fit into a plan to build it out? What are the things that you're looking at?
Well, what it boils down to, it's realistically what the city or county or what they want for any build out. Like, it's been California has done a very good job of making it cannabis is not so special. Like, that's the thing. If they've really flattened everything out. So yes, there are some restrictions. It's a new business, but they really want to maintain their existing laws and their existing processes to dovetail into a new industry. It's very, very smart the way that they hold things together as a state. And so for me, going into like a fresh piece of land, it's what are the requirements that the city's maintaining for if we were to put soybeans in the ground. Like, what is their base bottom? What do they require? And walking the client through a regular entitlement process, how to get to let's see what you're capable of doing. Yeah, you might own this property, you might not. You may be looking at several. Which one's going to pan out the best? Is it zoned properly? Do you have access to utilities? I mean, there's just a laundry list of things that we look at, regardless of the industry, that we just walk the client step by step. And a lot of it, and I think Dale, you say it better than me, it's red light, green light. Is if we can get past this stage, then we've got the next two to go to. But let's spend our time and effort on knowing this for sure before we start spending time and effort and money on the next three. There are some things you can do, simultaneously, but let's get all the red light, green lights out of the way before we start actually dumping a lot of time and effort in. And we've done a very good job of finding the right type of people and locations to match those things together. And on my team, the engineering and like we started out with a civil engineer to make sure that the property is will work for what they're trying to do. And then, there's steps that go on that. CEQA, environmental review, phase one, there's just a certain pattern that we go through, and we just take the client and walk them through, because many of these people, they're really good at the end result. They're really good operators, and we want them to be good at what they do. The construction aspect of it is very, very small at the very front end of their business, that they don't really realistically have to go back and never go unless they're doing a complete remodel or they want to expand in however many. But it's really kind of a one and done. And for me, I look at the projects like they're going to be there for 30 years. Every project, how long, you're going to build your livelihood out of this. I'm going to do my best to make sure that you're here for the long haul and you're going to be happy for that long haul, because the building is only the very, very beginning of the business. So yeah, that's a standpoint that I take
Mhm.
with every project.
Well, what we are doing working with you is we go in and take a look at the politics, because politics, as you know, it's unpredictable, and it can be the longest part of a process to get a business permitted, license, built out, and operational. And we had some discussions the other day with a potential client about it could be 8 months to 18 months. It's very difficult to know.
Right.
Um, and what we try to work on are what we call the endogenous part of this, the business, the structure, who has the money. And then once we've got that dialed in, if the property is going to match up to their expectations, that's where we start having the discussions with you and your group. Because the one I'm thinking about, you had to go find out where's the closest electrical power, where's the water, where's the sewer, what are the roads like? Because and I know that to get through the CEQA process, they're now doing this vehicle mileage test or tracking for these projects, and so you've got to get them in and out. We've always understood you got to build a road from wherever the closest government road is in there, but now they're going to track these miles, and so you got to build the entrance road to really match up with the vehicle traffic. So that's a whole issue. The initial CEQA, we brought people into, as you say, red light, green light before you spend a lot of money. But once we get the green light, let's assume we've gotten the green light now, and it's a friendly place. Let's walk through what you would do in, working with the planning people, pulling permits, bringing the architect to plan in. Let's walk through that, and we can compress the time frames, but I think it's important for people thinking about this, that this is what you're going to deal with. There'll be Zoom meetings, there'll be calls, you'll come out to kick dirt at the site, and it won't go according to your plans unless you have an understanding of what that means. So why don't you take off from there, JJ?
Yeah. So once we get the green light, it's an approved location, we can really start jumping in and engineering. My job as a contractor is to begin with the end in mind. Okay. So figure out what the end result's going to be but I need to take what the land is giving me. So,
Right.
if I, we're on a hill, okay, we're and I need to, bring in soil and bring in, dirt and level this thing out. Well, there comes to a point where the site is going to dictate how big of a footprint you can have for your building. There's a point where, yes, we can get you a bigger building, but it's going to 10x the cost of it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Okay. So then once we have like your pad and your floor plan or your pad for your building, then we're going to say, okay, how much building can we actually put on this, or greenhouse or hoop house or whatever. We take that. Okay. So then we've got that amount of square footage. Then the hardest utility to get in this industry is power. So then I would grab, okay, so if we're going to take in, and I'll punch it in our little, in the software we have, I'll say, okay, well, we're going to ask the utility company for this amount of power, because they only give you what you ask for. And that process can take a long time for their engineers to actually get you the power that you need. But you see how I'm working backwards with this. Second utility I would go after would be water or sewer, and see how far those are. Can we reach them? Do we have to use a septic tank? Is there a well on site? You start asking these fundamental questions. Well, what's basically how much water can I do it? Okay, well, that's going to shrink or expand the building, or the level of canopy. We understand very well that the state has put tiers, so let's get right up to whatever tier we need to, not a foot over, but let's figure out how to maximize your profit at the end, by working backwards through the system. And we've got some really smart people behind me. I don't do it myself. I've got teams and teams of people that assist the owners as a group moving through this. I pretty much just play quarterback on this, but it's a trusted group of engineers that I work with to do this, that have done it in the past, which it's wonderful to have a little bit maturity in the industry, because I'm not explaining what certain aspects are. So we go through that process. We figure out, okay, we need this much power. That's our ask to the utility company. This is the most feasible site plan that we can go with, that it works with the water. I mean, it works with all the utilities, security, the workflow of the business. There's certain things we can change and locate to bring down labor costs, because that's the goal, is to get your operating operating price down, and have nowadays as few people as you possibly can working for you. So we take all those items into consideration. We wrap them up into a nice set of drawings for the planning department. Planning department will take it and do their regular review. This is just another building. This is just another project. They go through, red light, green light on that after spending some time. And it's not like a final report. We're working with this city or county the entire time of what we can do, what we can't. It's a very open dialogue of things that they want to see. And we get our planning, get that approved. And then we go into our building permit, which is, what are the structures? Is it a metal building? Is it a tilt up? Is it a hoop house? Like, is it a greenhouse? What is this thing actually made of? Put together all that engineering. And then that's really where where the rubber meets the road for clients of, okay, we're going to use this odor control system. We're going to use these benches. We're going to use these lights. We're going to use, and that's really where they kind of put in. And that's actually the most fun, because you get to see how they want to shape their dream. Again, this is not my, I take ownership of it, but it's not my baby. Eventually I got to set it out. But bringing all those pieces in, and I do make recommendations. I'll say, this method over here will be a lot more cost effective upfront, and you can work into, your dream. Or we can scale this up very inexpensively by changing, X, Y, and Z, just because I've been doing this a while, and seeing other renditions and how other people have put things together. So yeah, and then once we get our building to permit, then we build as fast as we can to get you operational.
One of the discussions we recently had was about some of these previously opened areas that are now becoming budgetarily not a good place to go because of the cost of getting employees out there. And we had a recent discussion about it's a desert spot. Okay. And I don't want to go any further than that, because we got attorney-client issues here, but there's a desert spot, there's a question of water, but then the discussion went into, well, what does it cost to bring a cultivator in here, someone who knows how to grow these plants? We're talking $200K. So if you haven't put that into your budgetary cycling here, there are things that are not just build outs. Because part of what Heather and I work on is trying to educate the people running it, get them compliant, ready to be operators, to bring somebody in who can take a big facility that might have 50, 100,000 square feet of canopy in there and run it. Those people, they're not going to show up and camp out in the middle of the desert for free. So what kind of experience have you had with, problems like that? Either completing the project and build it out because now it's not cost effective, or getting it built and it's sitting out there in the middle of the desert, growing dirt.
It is very an interesting, I've seen a couple different variations of solutions, because you're right. You can have, buildings in very dense populations, industrial buildings that have all the utilities, access to a greater labor, higher level educated labor to do. How many botanists live out in the middle of the desert? Not very many. And how many cream of the crop cultivators want to go out where it takes 2 hours to go to the grocery store? Not a lot. It may make sense on paper where the building is it's cheap to build, it has all the land, it has all the resources you could possibly imagine. But if the people don't want to live there, then you're correct. Your price is going to get bumped. So it's a very interesting, something that every owner needs to consider in their performance when they're generating all this. Yes, it is cheap, and we're going to get labor at this level, but then high level chemistry and botanists and cultivators. It's a you got to advertise very well and get them in early.
Well, I think
those are long-term operating expenses.
Yeah.
that and part of the problem that we've had when we come into, you know, what I call a shit sandwich, that someone started this without a plan. It's a Keystone Cop routine, and all of a sudden here you are, nothing's working, and help me fix it. And I know you've been sucked into those myself. um, and what we're trying to do is learn from other people's mistakes, if you will. So when it comes to crunching numbers, what we're trying to do right now in the projects we're working on is, before you really hit the green light to start spending a lot of money, that,
Right.
you know, realistic numbers, realistic time frames. We have contracts in place, which, you know, too many of these traditional operators kind of balk at contracts, but you know as well as I do, especially in construction contracts, you need to be given authority to speak on their behalf. You need to be able to hire contractors within budgets and grants of authority, and then follow up. And once you get in the middle of a project and you've expended money and someone says, I'm not going to pay you now, you know, those are problems in your industry. Have you run into problems like that?
Yeah, I've gotten into let's just say a few where the working backward process, basically, you can never over plan for different situations. And in light, you know, construction, something is bound to go not to plan. Something is bound to go, you know, either timeline's extended, or you discover something, or new technology comes out that, like, oh, let's use this, you know. So we're constantly making adjustments. As far as budgets go, yeah, I mean, we've seen budget overruns just because indecision by the client, which is another one that's is particularly tricky. Once I'm engaged and we're building, that's a running clock in the background always for me. Like, I need to get you open, because every day is drawing more and more money for, you know, the professional salaries out there, equipment, heck, the job site office and the restroom. I mean, those don't just go away. But as far as you know, cost overruns, it's really helping the construction aspect. And I'm only a portion of it. I'm not the full business. That's really what Magic Path is for. They look at the holistic end-to-end business. I'm just the construction wing, and I put in my, you know, this is what I think it's going to cost. Do we have that money in the bank sitting in an escrow account that I can draw from, that it's always going to be there? Is there proof of funds, or do you think you're going to actually have phase one pay for phase two? I've yet to see that succeed. I've yet to see you know, let's just get operational. Let's just get that. And it's hard to say, because the utilities required are so great to put in the infrastructure to make it successful, to get one plant in the ground. So if you think phasing it, you can't phase infrastructure. It's just too dang expensive. And once the concrete's put in and the roads are put in and all the different infrastructure, like, you might as well go the full boat, because it's so darn expensive just to get to zero. You can phase equipment, like, you know, we can put more HG, you know, you could do a tiered light system, which we've done with rolling tables, and, like, you can do half the tables to begin with and put in a second layer once you put in the second layer of HVAC on the roof. Like, that makes sense. That's equipment. You know, you're going to spend a couple $1 million on equipment. Let's do it that way. But you can't not put in the infrastructure for the power and, you know, the condensate and the water and all the other fertigation. Like, you'll be down, and it's a living plant. So if we're doing like an indoor cultivation, I mean, I call it life support system. I mean, we're fake sun and, you know, the sun and the air. That's what we're doing to control, to speed up your cycles. I understand that very, very clear. And if you want to do that on level, I mean, like, for whatever reason, when people are thinking tiered system, it's like, no, you're doubling your canopy. You're doubling the humidity in the room. You have to extract twice as much. If you're using LEDs, they're not going to get as high. So you're not, you know, there's all kinds of different components that play into that. So let's go put the infrastructure in properly first for the full build out. Let's budget that, because trying to put in that afterwards will completely sink a project. It's nearly impossible to get going. And once you do get up and running, and you want to scale with equipment, not infrastructure, those I've seen be successful. But yeah, we're going to only get 2 rooms open, or, half this thing going first, see how that goes. And then hopefully we'll attract investors to get the second half. I've yet to see it work.
Well, one of the bigger problems we've run into is that people get started without thinking about contingencies and problems and budgeting for it. And now they're not only at the front end of their surfboard, but the wave just gave out. So one of the things we're doing with Magic Path is we're looking at troubled assets, or perhaps toxic assets. And one of them is real estate. Now, I know the first place that I went to look at that you were working on was a build out of an indoor cultivation facility, and you brought in the power, you had backup generators, and went in, there's a lot of internal build outs, and it looked like they had made a decent plan for getting to the end and being operational and have a couple dollars left over. But when they get to that point where they decide we can't go forward and they pull the plug, where does that leave you and your company that's now someone owes you money and they're a troubled asset, or they're not having problem collecting?
We have the as a construction company, we have the ability to file a mechanics lien. So we basically it's not a fun process. I don't like doing it, but we have that protection because we have it's what all contractors carry. I like to avoid that issue at this point. I mean, that was a learning curve getting into the industry. Just that's kind of a weird part that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Some of the the legacy builder or legacy guy operators deal with. But
I had a friend who was a contractor. Someone didn't pay him, and he hired me to go in and sue for breach of contract. We had a mechanics lien, and so this is not new to the industry. This was 25 years ago, more than that. So this is not brand new. One of the things that continues to surprise me is people who want to take on a project that's a multi-million-dollar project don't understand that there's already an entire body of law and regulations in place. If you take cannabis out, and in law we use the word widget. So if you're going to build a place that's going to make widgets, and it's going to increase the humidity in the room, and it may have an odor that the commercial zone might not allow, you have to go engineer that, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
it's no different.
I mean, part of why I enjoy working with you is because you've seen some of the the problems you run into and smacked up against walls, and if you back up and see where they got there, is that it was a clown show starting out. They're too optimistic about the future, and even today, because cannabis was declared an essential business, people think, oh, when we come out of this COVID-19, we're going to have these on every corner and we'll be able to do all the things we want. And the answer is no, you won't. And we are now working on some projects where the government in charge has not done this before. And so we'll be plowing ground with the local planners. But what I'm finding is when you talk their language, that we need to pull a permit, we understand what the building codes are and what it's going to take. They speak our language. When you come in, oh, I'm going to build a pot retail shop. And why do I have to put a handicap spot? I mean, I've heard this a lot. Why do I have to have wheelchair access? I mean, it's a widget.
Yeah.
When you have a commercial store and a parking lot, guess what the widget manufacturer has to do? Okay.
Yeah, your next door neighbor that happens to be a dress store has to abide by the same laws. And that's it's funny that you mentioned speaking the language, because that's really what I do. My job as a general contractor is to speak everybody's language. And going in, whether it's talking to the electrician, the plumbers, the mechanical guys, the framers, they may have the same exact problem, but they're using their own specific language. Then I can turn around and talk cannabis to the owner and say, okay, this is why this is important. And then turn that around and talk to the city or the county and use their language that they understand and know, and how that reflects on the owner. And I really enjoy that role. I like being that agent that can go and talk to the different trades and the owners in the county and the city to all go for the first goal. And that miscommunication happens so often because they may want the same exact thing, or they have the law written plain as day. Hey, it has to be like this. I have to take that, interpret it, and give it to, the however many people that affects. If it's a building trades, it's a building trades. If it's the owner, it's a budget. How is, they're all reading the information differently, and it's my job to put it in ways that they can understand, that makes sense to them, that also they can be moved forward using traditional building codes.
Well, and that's why when I turn it over to you, it's like, call me when you need my help. But, I don't cut and fill in compact ground. I actually have done some construction defect work a long time ago, but, and I've been on a tractor, but I don't profess to know how to do that. And so what I find refreshing is that we can take the word cannabis out and talk about the buildings, how we're going to put a pad in, what's the drainage, are we going to have culverts, where's that going to go? We now in the mountains, we have to build a place for the Cal Fire to hook up and download all your water storage, put a fire out, things like that. And so what I enjoy is not having to worry about that too much. Now in some of these inner urban areas, and we're about to move into one, I think, with a retail store. So inside the urban areas, is there a difference to how you're going to look at building inside of an urban environment versus a rural environment? Can you talk about that?
Well, you're going to have, proximity to people, which is always, a wild card. And how many, typically when you get into more urban areas, there's more politics. And that's why I'm thankful you're taking care of that for me. Because I like to go build. But yeah, I mean, realistically, there's more stringent codes. There may be, access to a bus route that you have to maintain. Your ADA, America's Disability Act, may come into play a little bit more because you're not out in the middle of the sticks or in the middle of the desert. But if you're in a retail setting, you're just going to have to abide by the same rules as everybody else on the street. So yes and no. There is some idiosyncrasies with it, but I've been doing this for so long, it's just kind of goes along with it.
One of the differences that I've seen is that the state of California has 58 counties, and they are arms of the state. And so they have a lot more hoops to jump through. When you get into a city, they're a lot different.
Oh, yeah.
We just saw this in one of the projects we're trying to tee up right now, that the city is like, hey, we want your tax dollars. What can we do to help you?
Correct.
And the county I'm working at is like, hold on for a minute, buddy. We're going back and rethinking this stuff. Like,
well,
yeah,
it's the broad, that's a broad, and the county is so much bigger. I mean, you might have one guy on the far side that doesn't agree with what you're doing, that's miles away from but he's got the same voice as, as a city. So it turns into this, again, it's a bigger politics when you're moving into the counties, and a lot more politics when you're moving into the counties. Yeah. And yes, I do see the cities seeing the revenue from this, and that's the bigger driver, because it's something a lot more, the golfers are very much more in demand, and they can see the growth on their end. So they are assisting in most cases, hey, there's this paperwork that, this our whatever city needs to have, that's different than anybody else. Well, thank you for telling me that, so I didn't have to spend extra time looking this up. It's something we're going to do in our due diligence process, but knowing that ahead of time. And I'm working with cities that get that, that know that the sooner you get open, the sooner they can start receiving tax revenue. So they're far and away more helpful. That's what I've seen.
I hear now a lot of the same old story. We're going to get tax revenue to you. And, the politicians I talked to, it's like, just hang on. How much money have you stuck into your treasury so far? Because that's an aspirational goal. And the political realities, especially in these rural areas, is that the CEQA process affords everybody an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to. And that's part of what we're seeing in rural. And in these inner cities, they've built them. Okay, you walk in and you don't get to cut a new road someplace because they've already got a city plan in place.
It's already done.
And I can remember, I don't want to, rain on Coalinga's parade, but I was there when they passed their ordinance and they sold a prison to the Marley group. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, oh, that's wonderful. And my old man was a truck into town, and I'm looking for, if I bring an 18-wheeler in here, can I turn it around? Because you're going to open a distribution network, and it wasn't happen. Well, the next thing we hear is, well, they don't have enough power.
Yep.
Okay. Which, it just told me, ooh, you should be thinking about this before you drop down a few $1 million that now you got to go spend a few more to bring in power. But it also, I had a meeting with the police chief and their planner. And we walked through the streets. It's like, my old man drove a truck. When you drove in, you better make sure you can get your ass out or you're stuck in the desert. They did not have a good answer for me. They wanted to just put a green light up and say, we're here, and rush in. But then comes the difficulties you would face. Because when you bring traffic into a city, especially if you anticipate a big 18-wheeler coming in, or even a smaller vehicle's got a trailer on it, you've got to plan to make turns with a traffic light. Maybe you got to build a traffic light. Maybe you got to build more cuts into the curb so that you can get them in, things like that. Have you had experience with troubles trying to make a cannabis facility fit a particular city that, maybe you're putting a round hole into or a square peg into a round?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned power. I was working with a developer that was asking for more power than the neighboring city actually produced or had the capability of producing. I mean, it was, between 40 and 100 acres of indoor cultivation. So super power hungry. And we're all scratching our heads, and PG&E turned around and they laughed at us. They're like, there's no way we can get you that power in the next 5 years, let alone the next 2. Like it's just not, we don't have the amount of power to give it to you. And that, that scaled that project a little bit. Again, it was working backwards. But yeah, I've gone into buildings that, they get all the initial, they've got a conditional use permit. They've got all the documentation. They have this, and I'm looking at them like, you don't have fire sprinklers in this building, and it's going to cost you, $500,000 to run fire sprinklers. Do you have that budgeted? And you just see them glaze over in their eyes, and they're like, oh yeah, we didn't know that was a requirement. I'm like, if you had brought in the team earlier to map out all these decisions, you wouldn't be left with a useless building. I'm sorry that you paid all this, but you green rushed, you staked your claim on the wrong piece of property. And I've seen that over and over and over, where what can I do with this building? What can I do with this chunk of land? I'm like, you can't do anything with it. Somebody sold you a bad bill of goods. Like, I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But you're not going to apply, what you have isn't going to apply for just traditional building codes and traditional planning requirements. It's just not going to work. And, great for jumping in, but you jumped in the wrong pool.
Well, one of the discussions that we've had in our group is that the Green Rush brought, maybe $150 to $250 a square foot triple net for leases, and you find out that, oh, I got to spend $500,000 to bring in, the sprinklers, whatever. And now we've got this landowner who thinks he's still going to get triple net, above $150 when the going rate's 50 to 75 cents a square foot, and you're responsible for everything. Have you had to deal with those kinds of situations?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's like, you wake up one morning, the law's changed, and now you think you're on an oil field, right? It just, hey, I've struck gold. Here I am. I'm gonna do what I can. And it's a lot of people that those are the type of people, not people buying buildings. Most of the time, they do a little bit more homework. But yeah, people that, oh, I can do this. I can lease my whole building. I was, 50 cents a square, and I'm going to be $2, and I'm going to go over, and I might just sell the whole darn thing. And they have me come look at it, and I'm, your current infrastructure is a ways out. You don't have enough, your utilities won't, if it was a distribution center where you just need to keep the lights on and the security cameras rolling, you're not doing any high,
Mhm.
heavy or medium industrial processes in this. It's just your building wasn't set up for that. So you have to go through this laundry list of items to get to zero to make it worth what you think it's going to be worth. And yeah, it's a sad thing to be on that side of the story.
Mhm. Well, these are some of the things we're discussing as we're looking at potential toxic assets, troubled assets, and doing due diligence. There's no bankruptcy, so these people are, hanging on to a lease that, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Well, all right. You've got a meeting to jump on too. I want to thank you,
Yeah,
JJ.
I mean, if I were to wrap up anything, it'd be do your homework up front. Get a good team beside you.
Mhm.
The money spent, you cannot over plan for this. The money spent upfront planning and getting to know what these things are and unearthing, what could possibly go wrong, will save you in the end, because there really isn't any help once you start moving forward, especially on a very expensive build out. Like, well, I understand that this is a very time consuming and all inclusive project. I mean, it consumes a lot of people's time and a lot of money. But yeah, over planning doesn't exist in this world.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, JJ. Well, thank you, and we'll continue to chat because we got some projects we're working on, and
Sure.
we'll have you back as things start to develop. Okay.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks.
you.